Gray, Telltale.
Check it.
Sahra Martinez knew something was wrong the moment she found the hotel receipt in Mark's jacket pocket. The Fairfield Inn, Tuesday, 2:30 p.m. The same Tuesday he'd claimed to be in back-to-back meetings for 3 months. Her husband of 5 years had been slipping away. Late nights, guarded phone calls, that guilty look when she caught him staring at nothing. But it was her mother Linda's sudden obsession with their marriage that really set off alarm bells. Linda had become increasingly invasive, asking probing questions about Mark's behavior, his stress levels, their relationship. Her perfectly manicured fingers would drum against Sahra's kitchen table as she analyzed every detail of their marriage with disturbing intensity. Today, Sahra sat in her car across from the Grind coffee shop, feeling ridiculous. She'd followed a hunch, a terrible suspicion that had been eating at her for weeks. When Mark's silver Honda pulled into the parking lot at 2:15 p.m., her heart hammered against her ribs, but when the passenger door opened and her 52-year-old mother stepped out, Sahra's world shattered. Linda emerged wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap like some cheap disguise. But there was no hiding the way Mark's hand found the small of her back as they walked into the cafe together. No hiding the intimate familiarity of the gesture. Sahra gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles went white. Her mother, her own mother. 45 minutes later, they emerged, talking intensely. Linda looked upset, gesturing wildly while Mark listened with his head down. Then Linda reached out and touched his arm, a gesture so tender, so possessive, that Sahra nearly vomited. She followed Linda to the Fairfield Inn and watched her mother walk into the lobby like she owned the place. That night, Sahra attempted to confront Mark. When she asked about his day, he lied effortlessly about meetings and emails, barely looking up from his plate. When she mentioned coffee, his fork froze halfway to his mouth before he denied leaving the office. The lie hit like a physical blow. Sahra excused herself to the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face, trying not to scream. When she returned, Mark was clearing dishes with jerky, agitated movements. He started to say something, his voice strained with guilt, but then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and went pale before disappearing into his office through the thin walls. Sahra heard fragments of his hushed conversation, mentions of ending something, of Sahra growing suspicious, of not being able to continue whatever sick game he was playing. Sahra backed away from the door, her mind reeling. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she'd follow him again. Tomorrow she'd get proof of what her husband and mother were doing behind her back. She just had no idea how much worse it was going to get. That night, as Mark slept beside her, Sahra stared at the ceiling and made a decision. She was going to find out what was happening to her marriage, no matter what it took. The next day came, and nothing happened. The next few weeks passed in a blow of careful observation and mounting anxiety. Sahra began to document everything: Mark's schedule, Linda's visits, the small inconsistencies that were piling up like evidence in a case she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. Mark's early meetings were becoming more frequent. When Sahra called his office one morning at 8:30, his assistant cheerfully informed her that Mark wasn't expected until 10. The lie hit her like ice water. Then there were the receipts. Sahra found them in Mark's pockets: a coffee shop across town, a hotel restaurant downtown, gas station purchases miles from his usual route. Each piece of paper felt like a small betrayal. Linda's behavior was becoming increasingly strange. Her visits were now almost daily, always arriving when Mark was supposed to be at work and leaving shortly before he was due home. She'd also become more critical of Mark, making subtle comments designed to plant seeds of doubt about his commitment. Sahra can feel it in her blood that there is something sinister happening. Mark claims to be going to work the next morning. He ate breakfast, got in his car, and left. Sarah followed at a distance as he drove directly to the Fairfield Inn. Her stomach dropped as she watched him park and walk confidently toward the lobby. Sarah waited 10 minutes before following him inside. The lobby was busy enough for her to blend in, pretending to read a magazine while watching the elevators. She saw Mark's elevator stop on the 4th floor. 20 minutes later, the elevator doors opened again, and Linda stepped out. Sarah's world tilted on its axis. Her mother looked different, softer, more feminine than usual. She wore a flowing dress that seemed to accentuate curves Sarah hadn't noticed before, and there was an unmistakable glow about her that Sarah suddenly recognized with horror. Sarah's throat tightened and her eyes burned with tears. Is that a baby bump? No, it can't be. Linda walked past Sarah without seeing her and headed toward Mark. From where Sarah sat, she saw them clearly. They talked intensely for nearly an hour, their body language speaking volumes. Mark looks like a man torn between something. Sarah's not sure between what. This wasn't a casual conversation between in-laws. This was intimate, emotional, complicated. When they finally stood to leave, Sarah ducked behind a pillar and watched them walk toward the elevators together. Mark's hand rested on Linda's lower back, guiding her with a gesture that was unmistakably possessive. Before the elevator closed, Mark pulls Linda into his embrace, and Sarah is not sure if that turned into a kiss. That afternoon, Linda called with an unusually bright voice, suggesting they go shopping for some mother-daughter time. When Sarah declined, claiming illness, Linda mentioned having strange morning sickness during her pregnancy with Sarah, then quickly corrected herself, claiming she'd meant a recent flu. But Sarah was no longer listening. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Her mother's frequent visits, the secret meetings, Mark's guilty behavior, Linda's changing appearance, the glow, the weight gain, the loose clothing. Her mother was pregnant, and Mark could be the father. Sarah spent the next 2 days in a state of numb shock, mechanically going through the motions of her normal routine while her world crumbled around her. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except the horrific realization that her husband and mother were having an affair. But it was worse than just an affair. Linda was pregnant, which meant this had been going on for months. While Sarah had been trying to conceive, desperate for a baby, her own mother had been carrying her husband's child. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that Sarah felt like she was drowning in it. On Friday afternoon, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't live with the uncertainty anymore. She needed to see it with her own eyes, to confront the truth head-on, no matter how much it destroyed her. She left work early and drove home, parking down the street from her house. Mark's car wasn't in the driveway, but Linda's blue sedan was, parked around the corner, partially hidden behind a neighbor's hedge. Sarah's hands shook as she used her key to enter through the back door. The house was quiet, but she could hear voices coming from upstairs. Her legs felt like lead as she climbed the stairs, each step bringing her closer to a truth she didn't want to face. The voices were coming from her bedroom. Her and Mark's bedroom. Sarah pressed herself against the wall outside the door, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure they would hear it. Through the crack in the door, she could see part of the bed. Mark was there, shirtless, his back to the door. And Linda was lying beneath him, her dark hair spread across Sarah's pillow, her face flushed with pleasure. But it was Linda's body that made Sarah gasp audibly. Her mother's belly was round and unmistakably pregnant, probably 5 or 6 months along. How had Sarah not noticed? How had she been so blind? We can't keep doing this, Mark was saying, his voice strained with guilt and desire. Sarah's getting suspicious. She doesn't know anything, Linda replied, her hands running down Mark's back. Besides, after the baby comes, everything will be different. We can tell her then. Tell her what? That I've been sleeping with her. Mother? That you're pregnant with my child? This is insane, Linda. It's not insane, Linda said firmly. It's love. You love me, don't you? Mark's response was lost as Sarah stumbled backward, her vision blurring with tears and rage. She'd heard enough. She'd seen enough, but as she turned to flee, Her elbow knocked against a framed photo on the hallway table. It crashed to the floor with a loud bang. The voices in the bedroom stopped abruptly. What was that? Linda's voice was sharp with panic. Stay. Here, Mark said. Sarah could hear him moving around the room, probably getting dressed. Sarah ran. She bolted down the stairs and out the back door, her chest heaving with sobs. She got in her car and drove aimlessly around the neighborhood, her mind blank with shock. After an hour, she returned home. Mark's car was in the driveway now, and Linda's was gone. Sarah sat in her car for several minutes trying to compose herself before going inside. Mark was in the kitchen when she entered, looking guilty and anxious. He'd clearly showered and changed clothes, but his hair was still damp. "Hey," he said, his voice artificially casual. "How was work?" Sarah stared at him. This man she'd thought she knew. This man she'd loved and trusted and built a life with. He looked the same as always, sandy brown hair, kind green eyes, the small scar on his chin from a childhood accident, but he was a complete stranger. "Fine," she managed to say. They had dinner in tense silence. Mark kept glancing at her, as if he were trying to gauge whether she suspected anything. If only he knew. That night, Sarah lay in bed next to her cheating husband, staring at the same pillow where she'd seen her mother's head just hours earlier. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that she felt hollowed out, like someone had reached inside her and removed everything that made her human. But underneath the pain and shock, something else was growing. Something cold and calculating. If Mark and Linda thought they could destroy her life and get away with it, they were wrong. Over the weekend, Sarah formulated her strategy. She couldn't confront them directly, not yet. She needed evidence, proof of their betrayal, and she needed to understand its full scope. She started with their financial records. What she found made her stomach turn. Mark had been withdrawing cash regularly for 4 months, amounts large enough to be significant, but small enough to avoid detection. He'd also been paying for Linda's medical expenses, including prenatal appointments. At a clinic across town, Sarah found receipts for expensive jewelry, flowers, and romantic dinners. Her husband had been courting her mother like a lovesick teenager, using their money to do it. But the most damning evidence came from Mark's laptop, carelessly left unlocked while he showered Sunday morning. Sarah found emails between Mark and Linda going back 6 months. The early messages were flirtatious but relatively innocent compliments about Linda's appearance, discussions about Sarah's work schedule, casual mentions of coffee dates. But as Sarah scrolled through the messages, she watched their relationship evolve from inappropriate flirtation to full-blown affair. The emails became explicit, emotional, delusional. Linda had written about feeling young and desired again, claiming they deserved to be happy. Mark responded about loving Sarah but having something different and more intense with Linda. The most recent emails focused on the pregnancy and their future plans. Linda wanted Mark to leave Sarah after the baby was born. She'd found an apartment across town where they could live together. She'd even picked out names. Sarah printed every email, every receipt, every piece of evidence, making copies and storing them in her office safe. Monday morning, she called her lawyer, David Chen, claiming she needed to update their wills. That afternoon, she met with him and revealed her discovery. David's eyebrows rose as he reviewed the evidence. The financial aspect alone would be grounds for a very favorable settlement. But when Sarah revealed that the other woman was her mother, carrying her husband's child, his mouth fell open in shock. Over the next week, Sarah continued gathering evidence while maintaining the facade of a normal marriage. She installed a voice recorder app and began documenting every suspicious conversation, every lie Mark told about his whereabouts. The hardest part was acting normal around Linda, who continued visiting regularly, sitting in Sarah's kitchen drinking coffee while pregnant with her son-in-law's child. During one particularly surreal visit, Linda announced her pregnancy, claiming it was from a one-night stand with someone she'd met at a conference. When Sarah asked about the father, Linda quickly dismissed him as unimportant, someone not in the picture. The lies came so easily that Sarah wondered if her mother had always been this deceptive, or if the affair had transformed her into someone unrecognizable. 2 weeks after discovering the affair, Sahra was ready to make her move. She'd gathered enough evidence to destroy both Mark and Linda, and she'd prepared for every possible scenario. On a Thursday afternoon, Sahra left work early and went home to wait. She knew from monitoring Mark's schedule that he and Linda were meeting at the hotel, and they would likely return to the house afterward. Thinking Sahra wouldn't be home until evening, Sahra positioned herself in the guest bedroom with a clear view of the driveway and master bedroom, her phone ready to record. Both cars pulled into the driveway. Sahra watched Mark and Linda emerge, his hand immediately finding her lower back as he guided her toward the house. They were laughing, looking relaxed and happy like a couple planning their future together. Sahra crept to the top of the stairs and listened as they entered below. Mark mentioned Sahra not being home until 6, giving them plenty of time. Linda replied she needed to lie down because the baby had been kicking all morning. Sahra slipped into the guest bedroom and positioned her phone to record as they entered the master bedroom. She heard Mark expressing disbelief about having a baby, Linda confirming it felt real. Then Linda revealed she'd learned the gender they were having a son. Mark's whoop of joy was followed by kissing sounds. Sahra forced herself to continue recording as she crept closer to their bedroom door. Through the crack, she could see Mark helping Linda out of her dress, his hands gentle on her pregnant belly. He expressed his love for both Linda and their unborn son. Linda reciprocated, talking about not having to hide anymore after the baby came, about being a real family. When Mark asked about Sahra, Linda's voice turned cold, dismissing her daughter as someone who would get over it, claiming Sahra had never appreciated Mark the way Linda did. Sahra watched them make love in her bed with a tenderness that somehow made the betrayal even worse. But she forced herself to keep recording, needing this evidence. Afterward, they lay together discussing their plans. Linda wanted to tell Sahra about their relationship after the baby was born. Mark was more hesitant, worried about Sarah's reaction. Linda assured him that Sahra would eventually understand they couldn't help falling in love, claiming these things happen. When Mark questioned whether such situations were normal, Linda grew quiet before revealing something that made Sarah's blood run cold. Linda confessed that Sarah's father hadn't actually left them. She had driven him away through an affair with his best friend. Sahra had grown up believing her father abandoned them, but the truth was that Linda had destroyed their marriage through selfish infidelity. Mark sat up, asking why Linda was telling him this. Linda explained she needed him to know she wasn't proud of her past, but claimed their relationship was different, real love, not just an affair. When Mark asked if Sahra knew the truth about her father, Linda firmly stated she never would, just as finding out about their affair would destroy Sahra. They needed to be careful about handling the situation. Sahra had heard enough. Her entire understanding of her childhood, her father's absence, her mother's supposed victimhood, all lies. Her father hadn't abandoned them. Her mother had driven him away just as she was now stealing Mark. Sahra quietly backed away and returned to the guest bedroom, her mind reeling. Her mother was a serial home wrecker, a woman who destroyed families as a pattern of behavior. After Mark and Linda left, Sahra called David and demanded to accelerate their timeline. She wanted to file for divorce immediately, revealing this new evidence of Linda's pattern of destroying marriages. That night, Sahra lay beside Mark, listening to him sleep peacefully while she planned his destruction. Tomorrow, her real life would begin. The next morning, Sahra woke before dawn and quietly packed clothes and personal items, storing them in her car before Mark woke up. At breakfast, she acted completely normal, mentioning she might work late due to a big project deadline. After Mark left, Sahra drove to David's office and filed for divorce, citing adultery and financial misconduct with an immediate restraining order preventing Mark from accessing their joint accounts. The sheriff would serve him at work that afternoon, and by the time he got home, the locks would be changed and he'd be legally barred from entering. Sahra drove to Linda's house. Her mother answered the door looking radiant in a flowing maternity dress, her hand resting protectively on her belly, already decorating for the baby with parenting books and a bassinet visible. Sahra pulled out her phone and showed Linda the video she'd recorded. Linda's face went white as she watched herself and Mark making love, discussing their future. Planning for after the baby's birth, Linda whispered that she could explain, but Sarah's voice was ice cold as she demanded an explanation for sleeping with her husband, getting pregnant with his child, and lying to her face for months. Linda broke down, claiming it wasn't supposed to happen this way, that they never meant to hurt Sarah. Sarah revealed she'd heard Linda tell Mark the truth about driving away Sarah's father through her own affair. Linda sank into a chair as Sarah confronted her about being a serial home wrecker who had spent Sarah's entire life lying about what kind of person she was. Linda desperately claimed she wasn't that person anymore, that with Mark it was different, they were in love. Sarah's bitter laugh made Linda flinch as she called out her mother's pathetic behavior. Linda's mask finally slipped as she snapped about Sarah not understanding what it was like to feel invisible at her age, claiming Mark made her feel beautiful and desired again. When Sarah accused her of destroying her marriage for selfish reasons, Linda lashed out, claiming Sarah's marriage was already in trouble. She said Mark had told her how distant Sarah had become, how work-focused, claiming Mark was lonely and she just gave him what he needed. Sarah stared at her mother, seeing her clearly for the first time, a sick, selfish woman who destroyed everyone around her. Linda's face crumpled again as she begged Sarah to remember she was her mother. Mentioning the baby as Sarah's little brother, Sarah cut her off, declaring the child was not her brother and Linda was no longer her mother. Linda had died the day she started sleeping with Sarah's husband. As Sarah turned to leave, Linda grabbed her arm with desperate news. There was something else Sarah needed to know. Sarah turned back, and something in Linda's expression made her stomach drop. Linda confessed that Mark might not be the baby's father. There had been someone else around the same time she'd started sleeping with Mark. When she discovered the pregnancy, she wasn't sure of paternity but told Mark it was his because she wanted to be with him. Sarah stared in horror as Linda admitted to trapping her husband with a baby that might not even be his, planning to get a paternity test after birth and tell Mark then if it wasn't his child. When Sarah demanded to know who the other man was, Linda's face reddened further. In a barely audible whisper, she revealed it was Sarah's father. Sarah's legs gave out as Linda explained that Sarah's father had come to see her 6 months ago, wanting to reconcile. They'd been together one night, but then Linda's affair with Mark began, and she never told either man about the pregnancy's uncertain paternity. Sarah's mind reeled as she realized her father, the man Linda had driven away with her first affair, had returned, only for Linda to cheat on him again, this time with Sarah's husband. Standing slowly as her worldview crumbled, Sarah declared Linda the most selfish, destructive person she'd ever known, someone who had ruined every relationship, lied to everyone who loved her, and was now sitting pregnant with a baby whose father she didn't even know. Linda sobbed, claiming she needed Sarah and couldn't do this alone. Sarah's final words were devastating. Linda was alone because she'd made sure of that, just like she'd made Sarah figure out life without a father when she was 10 years old. With that, Sarah walked out of Linda's house and out of her mother's life forever. Sarah sat in her car outside Linda's house, hands shaking on the steering wheel. The conversation had revealed layers of betrayal beyond her imagination. Her mother wasn't just a cheater, she was a serial destroyer of families. So selfish she would lie about paternity to trap a man. Her phone buzzed with 17 missed calls from Mark. She turned it off. She drove to a hotel and checked in under her maiden name, needing time to process everything that had happened and figure out what came next. That evening, Mark texted from an unknown number begging her to call. Against her better judgment, she answered his desperate call. Mark pleaded for 5 minutes to explain, but Sarah reminded him she'd listened to 5 years of lies, every excuse about working late, every fake early meeting, every time he'd looked her in the eye and pretended to be faithful. When Mark claimed he never meant for it to happen, describing it as something that started innocently with coffee when Linda was lonely, Sarah's voice turned dangerously quiet. She questioned his inability to control putting his hands on her mother, getting her pregnant, and lying daily. Mark insisted he loved Sahra, calling what happened with Linda temporary insanity. Sarah's bitter laugh pointed out that 6-month temporary insanity involved planning a future, discussing baby names, and preparing to leave her after the birth. When Mark realized Sahra had everything on video, his voice cracked, asking what she'd done. Sahra explained she'd documented the truth, something he seemed incapable of doing. The conversation took a devastating turn when Sahra revealed that the baby might not even be his. Mark's whispered realization that Linda had told Sahra everything was followed by Sahra explaining about her father's involvement and Linda's pattern of destroying marriages. Mark's broken sob might have moved Sahra if she had any compassion left for him. His desperate pleas for counseling and working through their problems fell on deaf ears. Sarah's final words were ice cold and definitive. Their marriage was over. She'd filed for divorce. She never wanted to see him again, and if he came near her, she'd call police. She hoped his 6 months of betrayal were worth losing everything. Over the following weeks, Sahra rebuilt her life, working with David to secure the house and majority of their assets. Mark didn't contest the divorce. He was too devastated by Linda's paternity revelation to fight. Through mutual friends, Sahra learned that Mark and Linda's relationship had imploded after the truth emerged. Linda had moved in with Mark temporarily, but they fought constantly. Mark demanded a paternity test. Linda refused, and eventually Mark kicked her out. 3 months later, David called with news. Linda had given birth the previous week, and the paternity test revealed the baby wasn't Mark's. Sahra closed her eyes, realizing it was most likely her father's child. Linda had listed father unknown on the birth certificate, but given the timeline Sahra had shared with David, the conclusion was obvious. Sahra felt a strange mix of emotions: relief that Mark wouldn't be tied to Linda forever, sadness for the innocent baby caught in this mess, and anger at her mother for creating such chaos. David mentioned that Linda had been trying to contact Sahra, claiming she had something important to tell her about Sarah's father, something she described as a matter of life and death, despite her better judgment. Sahra found herself curious about her father, the man she'd spent most of her life believing had abandoned her. That evening, Sahra called Linda's number. Linda's weak, hopeful voice answered, and Sahra coldly stated she was only calling because David mentioned something important about her father. Linda thanked her for calling, acknowledging Sarah's hatred while insisting there was something crucial Sahra needed to know. With the sound of a baby crying in the background, Linda revealed that Sarah's father was stage 4 pancreatic cancer with only months to live. When Sahra asked how Linda knew this, Linda explained that her father had contacted her after the baby's birth, having heard through mutual friends about the child and wanting to know if it was his. Linda had told him the truth, and he'd shared his diagnosis. Sarah's hands shook as she learned her father was in hospice care in Portland, wanting to see her. He'd been asking about her for years, wondering how she'd turned out, wishing he could have been part of her life. Linda explained that he was ashamed, thinking Sahra hated him for leaving, not knowing that Sahra had never learned the real reason for his departure. After getting her father's contact information, Sahra immediately booked a flight to Portland, finally ready to reconnect with the parent who hadn't actually abandoned her. 6 months later, Sahra stood in her new apartment across town, finally at peace. Her father had died 2 weeks after their reunion, but those final days together had healed wounds she'd carried for over 20 years. Robert Martinez had been everything Linda wasn't: gentle, honest, genuinely remorseful for the lost time. He'd explained how loving Linda had nearly destroyed him. Holding Sarah's hand, he'd told her that despite everything that happened, she'd turned out to be an amazing woman. She'd started therapy, begun dating a kind colleague named James who knew her whole story and loved her anyway, and was considering a job offer in Seattle. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Linda, sharing that baby Samuel was walking now, had their father's smile, and that she thought about Sarah every day. The message ended with desperate apologies and claims that she couldn't make things right, but wanted Sarah to know she was sorry. Sarah stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it without responding. Some betrayals were too deep for forgiveness. Some wounds were meant to scar, but as Sarah looked out at the city skyline, she realized she was grateful. Linda's betrayal had nearly destroyed her, but it had also freed her from a marriage built on lies and a relationship with a mother capable of unthinkable cruelty. She was 32, successful, and finally free to build a life with people who actually loved her. The phone buzzed again, another message from Linda. This time, Sarah blocked the number. Some chapters needed to stay closed forever.